I want to share a few things that have happened to me since moving to the land down under. I moved to Australia in 2018, built a home with my partner in far north Queensland. The area where we built is part of the Daintree rainforest. We are surrounded by rainforest and the coral sea is about 50 meters through the dense brush. Things were relatively quiet until about 5 weeks ago. Now we are seeing min-min lights or spook lights, little balls of light that are far too big and bright to be glow bugs moving through the trees and about the property. Booms and bangs against the outside wall of our newly built home. We grab a torch, flashlight, and go out to see what's going on. The noise is so loud. If it had been a bird or bat, that poor thing would have broken its neck or at least stunned itself. The property is fenced in, gated, and locked. No rocks or clods of dirt on concrete. Nothing on the side of our house, as if kids were pulling a prank. It literally sounds like hands banging on the walls. We get up to go see and then come back in, get back in bed, and it happens again. Like it's toying with us, being mischievous. The locals and aboriginals have told me about Yowie, which is similar to the US Bigfoot, Bunyip, and other Dreamtime creatures that reside and make the Daintree their home. It is one of the oldest rainforests on the planet. We are surrounded by the beauty of nature, and now it's like every night is a new adventure. We don't know what might happen next. Nothing happens inside the home, just on the property. I have done research online and at the local library. I can't find anything other than the occasional Yowie sighting. I've gotten in touch with a few ghost hunting teams and asked my questions. I'm waiting for a response to see if they may know of anything. My partner's sister said we may have built our home on a gravesite, but I doubt this. Not everything is built on a gravesite. It may just be the land itself. I know the Daintree is very special to the Aboriginals. It's sacred. Why is it when things like this happen, I never have my cell phone on hand? It's like one is so caught up in the moment that all you can do is experience it. But from now on, I'm going to try to capture something on film. This story actually has a YouTube link that's associated with it that I will include down in the description. It's a video that the podcast owners that she interviewed with actually did. Apparently they found proof, or I guess they found the evidence during their recording session that something was mimicking this person. It'll make more sense after I read the story, so I'm going to read the story now. So, earlier I had done a podcast where I talked openly about an experience I had as a little girl. It was about my previous post, Shadow in the Water, and while we were talking, my boyfriend, who has a lot of experiences with me, became excited and wanted to share some of his own. But he decided not to because he wanted to be respectful to the podcast crew on the line. After I told my boyfriend it's okay, you can talk, he shook his head and then a disembodied voice said, "Hello," in the room where the podcast crew were located. I actually heard it through my phone. I thought it was the crew who said hello or one of their friends who I remember was going to stop by and give them some drinks from the gas station. I paused and then said anyway and continued the story, and I remembered thinking it was odd. It just didn't sound right, because I heard it very clearly. As I was watching the video of the podcast, I remember feeling a bit of shock when I heard the hello and none of the crew's mouths moved. So this meant they didn't say anything when I heard the hello through my phone. This isn't really too weird or odd for me, because typically this happens whenever I talk with my voice about my past experiences. I thought it had been a long enough period of time where maybe it wouldn't happen again. For a bit of short backstory on that, in middle school and high school, I had the nickname Ghost Girl. It was something the bullies used to call me, because whenever I talked about something that happened which was paranormal, the person would become hunted by Voices or knocking or doors slamming or even a shadow man in a hat. Usually it would only happen if the person got scared of the story. For some reason, they were seen as disrespectful. I also used to take a path through the school forest to get home because the bullies had been too scared to go in there. After one of the bullies had something scary happen to them in there, the nickname was used even more throughout the class. Anyway, shortly after the podcast was done, I felt a draft in the room and realized that my boyfriend opened the window before the podcast started. This is bad. That is something you don't do, and it was especially bad because it was the middle of the night. I talked to him about keeping the windows closed in the future, but he is still very scared because of what he had to deal with in the past. We had a bad experience, and because of that, we always move the moment something starts up again. That night, I went to sleep and had a vivid nightmare, sort of. In my dream, my house was dark without any lights on. It was the middle of the night. My bedroom door was open and I could see moonlight reflecting off the tile floor down the hall where my front door would be. It was cold, and I had taken my blankets off and walked past my open bedroom door down the hall to the front, which was apparently open as well. I planned on just closing the door and turning the heat up and going back to bed. When I turned to the front door, a teenage girl in a torn, long, gray, dirty nightshirt stood still outside of it. Her hair was long, messy, and brown, and her skin was very pale but covered in dirt. Behind her, half of the lawn was covered in snow while the other half had no snow at all. The moonlight had a dim blue light reflecting a dim sparkle of the fresh white snow. She stood there and looked at me in silence. Then she whispered, "He was watching you." Before I could ask who, something that I couldn't see grabbed my back and forcefully dragged me backwards down the hallway in the direction of my bedroom. It happened in under a second. I went from the front door and was soon thrown into what looked like my own sleeping body. And then I woke up. I shrugged it off as a simple dream. I don't like to let weird things like that get to me. As time passed, I started to notice some weird things going on in the house. My boyfriend and I were lying on the bed, and I played him a video from the podcast about the voice. When it was done playing, we laid there for a bit and browsed the web and read it. A bag from across the bedroom tipped over off of a small storage box. My boyfriend was spooked, but I told him not to worry about it. Then a few moments later, something else dropped off the table, which was beside the storage box. We didn't talk about it, and I just went over and picked them up. They didn't drop again. A few days passed, and I had just woken up. It was sunny, and I was just listening to music on my bed. My boyfriend sent me a text message that he went to visit one of our friends. He is super social, and the quarantine is hard on him. As I listened to music, I felt a pocket of hot air hanging by the cheek of my face. I raised my hand to my ear, and the air was hot but faded. I shrugged it off as well, with the explanation that it must have been hot air from my head since I just woke up and my head had been on a pillow just 15 minutes ago. Then I looked up from my phone, and there was a man's pale face about 3 feet away. It came as soon as it left. The door opened and my boyfriend came into the room. He smiled and asked me about my day and handed me an iced coffee that he bought for me on his way back. He climbed into bed and was getting ready to watch some TV. He went still for a second. He felt the bed, patting the bed right next to me. "Why is the bed so hot here?" He kept patting it. I had no idea how to explain it. I thought he must have just left the house, but he said he left a little while ago. I felt the bed next to him, and it was hot, like someone was just lying there next to me. He shrugged it off and asked me how my coffee was. It was weird, but it wasn't, creepy. As time went on, I would be in the bedroom and there would just be, weird shadow orb things that would flicker around at times. It wasn't bugs or flies. We don't have any bugs, and the room is always clean. But I kept shrugging it off as just, nothing. My dog started to look at a certain spot in the room, at the foot of my bed. She would just stare at it. Even when she jumped off the bed to eat her food, she just kept looking at that spot. Sometimes when she was lying next to me, her head would move like she was watching somebody walk by. Also during the podcast, she kept barking loudly, but she doesn't really bark. I figured she was just barking at me because I was on the phone, which she just doesn't do. The next night, I was preparing to talk about another experience with the podcast crew. I was a bit nervous because this story was a lot more scary and complex. I had gotten up and walked over to my bedroom door and opened it. Right in the hallway, there was a shadow there. He was tall and had a hat on and a long coat, just like the one I saw in the story I was going to tell them. I tried to let my eyes adjust because it was dim in my bedroom, but the rest of the house was dark. I realized as my eyes adjusted, even though the rest of the house was dark, the hallway in the living room was lighter than what the Shadow Man was. The back door, which was a little bit across from the front door, was, for some reason, wide open. And the moonlight was shining on the wall and the sofa behind him. The Shadow Man dispersed like a cloud a little bit later. I messaged the podcast crew to see if they had anything weird happen. One of them said it was just weird tapping sounds, and that was about it. Later on, I was in my bedroom and I fell asleep. A man showed up in the dream and told me not to tell them the story. He looked like the face of the man I had seen earlier. He said that something was looking for me and I had a bounty on my head? That something was looking for me, and if I told it, they would go after the crew in order to try and find me? That they would do more to them than just knocking and tapping in voices? I don't kid around with this stuff if it involves other people. I don't just shrug it off. When I woke up, I messaged the crew and said I couldn't go through with the podcast this time. They were super understanding about it, but I didn't tell them about what happened or why. I just didn't want anything to happen to them or my boyfriend because of sharing it openly. It wasn't worth it. Anyways, that's the most recent story. Probably one of the strangest. Thanks for reading. Whether the hello was from the Shadow Man in the hat and coat, which is eerie similar to what I heard before, or if it was the mimic, I don't know. But what I heard through the phone, it sounded much more like a man saying hello. But in the video, it sounded very different from the voice I heard over the phone. Feel free to share your thoughts. I know this is strange, and it was strange for me too. All activities stopped after I told the podcast I couldn't do the second interview. Basically, I'm a skeptic of convenience. I'm interested in everything paranormal, but I'm just not convinced by it. However, I do really want to be. This leads me to me and my friend, who is a strong believer, to take me to some woods near his house he claims is haunted by the spirit of a man who killed himself in said woods. Now, the story of the guy is true. He did indeed kill himself in the woods, but are the woods haunted? I'm unsure. So me and him have been doing some low-key investigation of it. Now, we've seen some creepy stuff, heard some creepy stuff, nothing that couldn't be explained away by something rational. So we got a little brave and decided to go into this field connecting to the forest at night. It was around 11, and me and my friend were simply walking across the field when I noticed there was a dark, humanoid silhouette slowly walking towards the forest. I turned to get my friend's attention, and then turned back to notice that he wasn't walking anymore. He was full-on sprinting toward the forest, away from us, and we simply watched them disappear into the forest. There's nothing on the other side of those woods for a good few miles, and so someone is running through the woods in the middle of night, it isn't exactly feasible. It's by far the most paranormal thing we've encountered near that forest, and we have never encountered anything similar to that again. So that's my story. I hope you believe me, because only me and my friend know what we saw, and everyone else just brushes it off. To start, sorry for the long post. I was inspired to write down my experiences after reading a similar story. When I was 18 or 19, I worked nights at a beautiful old care home, just outside of the town that I lived in. The home itself was situated high up on a hill, and was very isolated. Nothing but fields and hills around it. I think it was maybe a few 100 years old, built on 3 levels and 2 specialized wards for residents with severe dementia. It was my first job, outside of a little Saturday stint working as a cashier. I was very sensitive and shy, and from the first moment I walked in there, I felt overwhelmed. There was a lot of sadness in that place, as well as this feeling of deep calm. I can't describe it well, but sometimes the atmosphere felt so thick and so heavy, it was like walking through soup. I worked nights with a small team of people. It was our job to make sure that everyone got to bed and was safe and clean and comfy. We would also keep an ear out for anyone ringing bells or buzzers in the night. On the walk was an intercom system. The number of the rooms who had rung would flash up. Of course, during my time there, we did have a few people that passed away. One, as I was cleaning her room, which really shook me up. However, one of the strangest things happened after a little old lady passed away in a downstairs room. On the night I worked, the room was empty, as it was being prepped for someone new to move in. We had finished our rounds, and were all in the large common room when the intercom flashed up with the room number of the lady who had passed. We were a little confused, but wondered if another resident had wandered in there and maybe pressed the button. Upon checking, the room was empty, and all the residents on that ward were seemingly asleep in their beds. The buzzer for that room rang maybe 4 times that night, and apparently the next night too. I wasn't on that shift. One of the ladies I worked with had a real dislike of the downstairs area. You had to walk through this really cool glass atrium-style passage to get to the lower area of the building, which was where all the residents with severe dementia lived. The doors to the atrium were locked for safety, and there were usually 2 members of staff situated down there at all times. This particular lady hated being put on shift down there. She told me she would often hear doors opening and shutting when everyone else was asleep, and once had felt a hand on her shoulder when no one had been sat with her. The home cat, who was a lovely, gentle little thing, would hiss, spit, and claw if someone tried to take him near that ward. Personally, I also hated being down there, as it felt very dark and oppressive. Maybe just as it was a basement. The last thing is less paranormal and just a bit creepy. There was a lady in room 45. I remember as I used to dread seeing that number flash up. She would always ask for me if I was on shift, unfortunately. She was a very large lady with limited mobility, so often needed help with moving to use the loo, which is when she would call for me. Her room was filled, and I mean filled from wall to floor, with dolls. They even covered her bed, so that when she slept, they were over her like a blanket. When I went up to help her, she would grip my arm, look me straight in the eyes, and tell me about her husband who was in the room, and who was getting her pregnant and raping her. For a young, naive 18-year-old girl, this really used to scare me. I would help her into bed afterwards, and she would often try to get me to stay to change the baby or talk about the people that lived in her room. It was all due to the dementia, and I knew that, but damn, I hated being in there at 3 a.m. Okay, so if you haven't seen my last post on here, named The Man Under the Streetlight, then you should read it. It's just as creepy as these experiences. Also, this post will be in list format. 1. This is the first paranormal experience I ever had. So, I'm in my room, and I think I was like 4 years old then. My mom was reading me a bedtime story, and I look over to the wall, and it looks like there's a shadow made of light looking at me. Almost right when I looked at it, it ran away. 2. I was in the bathroom. My bathroom is right next to my mom and dad's bedroom, and I looked over, and it looks like a floating javelin racing to the door. 3. After the last one, I didn't have anything for like 3 years until when we went on an overnight field trip for the school. And of course, the room was haunted. Before I get more of the story done, I have to give you at least the layout of the room. So, the room is split into 4 parts. The bathroom, the main area, and the 2 bedrooms. I was in what I'll call room 1, and there were also 6 people there including me, and 1 other guy in room 1. So after we got done with getting set up in the room, we went to our activities, and after we had to go to bed, at night, we both woke up at like 3:47. The other guy could barely breathe, and I couldn't get up. At first, I didn't see anything. The other guy could see it right away. Also, since he couldn't barely breathe, he didn't scream. But then, I saw it. It looked like a body with no head, and a missing right arm made of brown fog sitting on his chest. And just as fast as it appeared, it disappeared. 4. Okay, so this is the most tame and short ones, so I'm counting them all as 1. So one day I had all my toys in a toy dump truck. I left my room, and when I came back, the toys were spilled. So one time I was in the living room, and I heard a box of toys and pencils fall and hit the ground. This one happened twice. Well, hello there, friends. I hope you enjoyed this haunting collection of really creepy ghost stories. Personally, I love reading haunting and ghost stories, just paranormal stories in general, because these really... they just make you start to feel cold, if that makes sense. Anyway, if you enjoyed this video and would like to hear more stories like this, please consider joining the Nevermore. In order to join the Nevermore, all you have to do is click that little subscribe button, click the little bell next to it, and then you are officially part of the Nevermore. Being part of the Nevermore also means you can access things like my Patreon, my Ko-fi, my Twitter, my Reddit, and my Facebook. You can access them without being part of the Nevermore too, but it's not as fun. There's also a page where you can submit a story to me if you have one you would like me to feature on my channel. All that said, my friends, I hope you're doing fantastic out there. I hope you're having a great day. And just keep your chin up. I know things are rough and kind of have been rough pretty much since January of this year, but as humans, we will get through these situations, and from it, we will come out stronger. I promise you that. Alright, friends, I'll see you in the next video, but until then, sleep well.